Hello, I'm Professor Younkyoo Kim with Division of International Studies at Hanyang University, Republic of Korea. I'm very glad to have you with my One Asia lecture. The title of my lecture today will be 21st Century Silk Road, China's Belt and Road Initiative, 2013-2020. Today, I'm going to speak about five smaller topics on the 21st Century Silk Road. First, I want to talk about what is Belt and Road Initiative. It's an old revival of old Silk Road. So 21st century version of Silk Road program launched by Chinese government in 2013. So we want to understand what is it. Second, how Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, evolved from 2013 to 2020. There have been some initial successes, but after 5 years, beginning 2018, there have been some obstacles, pushbacks by participant governments. So we want to understand what were those pushbacks for BRI. Then how did BRI begin to be rebooting after the second BRI forum in April 2019. Then we are going to focus in particular on railway connectivity between Asia and Europe. China-Europe Railway Express. How successful is rail transportation linking Asia-Europe today? And in linking Asia and Europe, why Iran is key? First, Belt and Road Initiative. This probably is the most ambitious infrastructure project. Used to be called One Belt, One Road, but it was renamed as Belt and Road Initiative. It spans 3 continents, Asia, Europe, Africa, covers 60% of the world's population. In achieving this connectivity, China plans to become the world's next superpower. BRI essentially has 2 components. The first component, so-called Silk Road Economic Belt, Silk Road Economic Belt. Silk Road Economic Belt is made of 6 corridors. You don't have to remember all of this, but 6 corridors linking Asia, Europe, Africa. So in so doing, China can directly trade with these different continents. So the building of roads, railway, bridges, and power plants are needed. Second component, which is maritime Silk Road. This is a chain of seaports from the South China Sea and the Indian Ocean, so that China can trade through maritime routes. It's kind of interesting. This is an overland Silk Road. This is a maritime Silk Road. But overland is called belt and maritime is called road. So you don't have to be confused about this. Okay. Next. This shows these two Silk Road, land and sea routes or corridors of Belt and Road. So dotted line, Silk Road Economic Belt, which is overland. Blue dotted line indicates maritime Silk Road. So it begins here in the hinterland of China, then passing Central Asia. This is the border between Kazakhstan and China, Burgos. So this will be important hub. Then travels like this. So once they pass Central Asia, they reach, these are all important countries, Iran, Iraq, this way. Then they reach Europe. And these are maritime. And these are Ice Silk Road, Arctic Silk Road. So this ambitious, this much ambitious. Now, how big is it? How big is BRI? This is the number of participating countries. They all signed up to the initiative, and the investment that is made into BRI signing, it varies, widely varies from hundreds of billions of dollars, or some say reaches up to 8 trillion. But probably the figures that was released by World Bank, maybe most trustworthy, they put the total investment at the range of $575 billion. But still predicting the range of the scope of investment and the future prediction, very difficult. But I mean, even 500 billion or even $8 trillion pales to the total needed investment according to Asian Development Bank. 26 trillion will be needed. This much infrastructure investment must be made up to 2030. So even this humongous project pales when you look at the total needed infrastructure demand. Probably the best available data suggests that this 1 trillion China's promise has not yet been met. it'll take several more years to reach $1 trillion. This must be the correct figure. One other estimate that might attract our attention will be institutions like American Enterprise Institute, Heritage, most widely cited document will be Heritage Chinese Global Investment Tracker. According to this, they put the total investment so far at roughly $340 billion during 2014 and 2017. Now, in terms of regional breakdown, still you could see how where China look in terms of investing. Most of the investment made so far into Europe, the biggest investment made into Europe and Africa. Huge investment had already been made, and East Asia, and this is Middle East. Middle East probably is going to grow very much. Now, in terms of how BRI evolved, probably the most important turning point was 2018. So BRI began 2013. 2018 was the 5th anniversary. So between 2013 and 17, the BRI seemed to be going very smoothly, and a lot of attention was paid to this Chinese ambitious project. But things began to go a little bit rough beginning 2018. That's when Western countries and America began to find fault with this Chinese project. So they began to see BRI as a threat. So kind of discourse America and other Western countries developed as far as finding fault with BRI. Most important concept was debt trap. In other words, the first person who developed this concept of BRI lending was Brahma Chelani, who is an Indian researcher. He first coined Chinese lending as debt trap. In other words, Chinese government lent huge sum of money to ensnare these poorly functioning developing economies into a debt. When they default on these Chinese loans, they can confiscate those precious assets and ports, roads, railways. So that's debt trap. So the warning signs were put out, like according to institutions like Moody's, 60% of BRI member countries have sovereign debt ratings. In a sense, I think this kind of debt unsustainability problem began to rise because by design, BRI project was unavoidably unsustainable in a sense, because China was one of the first countries who made these big infrastructure investments in mostly countries like post-Civil War Sri Lanka, or even countries like Pakistan. Those are all, very unstable, war-torn countries. Into these countries, China was making, 2 digits of billions of dollars investment. So 2018, it was discovered that at least 7 countries was running into trouble with these BRI projects. So the reason being popular backlash, in other words, anti-China sentiment running deep, or sometimes governments rethink BRI projects because the new leader succeeded. Oftentimes corruption related, contracts are petted, or the ratio of debts to total GDP too high. So sometimes these projects goes against environmental standards. So those were some of the criticisms, including those projects rely on imported labor rather than local hires. Now, throughout 2018, from January to December, China suffered these criticisms. And most of these criticisms were leveled against countries such as Sri Lanka. The famous port called Hambantota. Sri Lanka defaulted on loans by the Chinese government. Therefore, Sri Lanka had to yield the port, Hambantota, to the ownership of the port given to the Chinese government as a lease for 99 years. So this has become a very famous failing case of BRI. Pakistan as well. There's a new prime minister coming in, Prime Minister Khan. He rethink the 60 billion BRI project and asking for restructuring the project. So from Sri Lanka to Pakistan to Malaysia, even there's a new Prime Minister, Mahathir, succeeding former Prime Minister. Former Prime Minister was imprisoned for irregularities relating to BRI project, and Malaysia was having, according to BRI agreement between Malaysia and China, a huge railway project was designed to be constructed in the range of $20 billion, and new Prime Minister Mahathir coming out and saying that this cost of $20 billion was way above the normal cost, so he was asking for discount. So that was the problem between Malaysia and China, and also some African countries as well. And in Central Asia, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, these two relatively, smaller and poor Central Asian countries having similar problems. So throughout 2018, China suffered these kinds of pushbacks by BRI signatories. Now, so that's how 2018 went. Now, 2019, China began to respond to these backlashes. Important turning point came when China summoned second BRI forum in Beijing. So leaders all across the world gathered in Beijing, April 2019, to attend second BRI forum. And as a result of it, we assessed that BRI received rebooting boost in the face of those concerns a year before. First, more interest was shown in the BRI project, like 36 heads of state came all the way to Beijing for the second forum. When the first forum was held back in 2017, only 28 heads of states came, and 6,000 participants from 150 different countries, including 92 IOs like IMF and the UN. Now, to them, Xi Jinping rebranded BRI. He promised he's going to increase imports from developing countries. He's not going to put up barriers to these countries, and he's going to change investment patterns, and he's going to keep up high quality standards, and those lendings will be much more sustainable. So he was kind of saying to the world that there have been some mistakes because those lendings in the previous years there have been some mistakes. Those policy banks, they made some mistakes. He's going to change it. Okay. It was almost like kind of you know, BRI 2.0 was almost born, and almost as if countries were responding to this Chinese charm offensive. Even before second BRI forum was held, March 2019, China was getting huge boost from the signing, maybe I should call historic signing, between Italy and China. This gave China a huge rebooting, because Italy was the first G7 country to sign a memorandum to join the BRI. And European Union partners and the United States, they were objecting to Italy membership in BRI. China was campaigning, a lot of public relations. They welcomed in open arms Italy. They made an analogy of Italy-China collaboration on BRI as Nixon's visit to Beijing 50 years ago. So this is how BRI enter second stage, 2.0. Now, so BRI was reborn, and Italy became an important partner of BRI, and Iran obviously was another important partner. But if there was the first pushback against BRI in 2018, 2020, almost a year after BRI 2.0 was launched, we have huge contingency, that is coronavirus. The media reports that the two countries that have been hit the most, hardest, are Italy and Iran. Supposedly, most closest partner of BRI. You're asking why? So for the most, they are the closest ones. So Italy opened many sectors to Chinese investment after the signing, from infrastructure to transportation. Transportation, especially ports. There are 4 important ports in the Mediterranean Sea. China, back in 2008, they began to rule, as an owner of Piraeus port in Greece. So Italy follows Greece. Because those ports are strategically very important locations. Lombardy, Tuscany. These are the 2 regions that saw most Chinese investment. In fact, according to some reports, it was on February 21st, 2020, when the first Wuhan coronavirus infection was reported. And Lombardy happened to be the hardest hit region in the country. The more investment by China, the harder, the more hardest hit by the virus. How about Iran? 2019 was the year Iran officially signed up to BRI, or One Belt, One Road, old name. Iran as well is seen by China as a crucial player, because Iran is not only rich in oil and gas, but also railroad. Iran lies at the intersection of East and West. You're going to see some map shortly. So Iran will be unavoidable place, the railroad connection from Western China, Xinjiang, going all the way to Turkey, Europe. They have to pass Tehran. So that's why Iran was needed by China. Now, as I mentioned, BRI has two components. One is overland, second maritime. Overland is about rail. So basically, BRI, in terms of overland connectivity, it's a rail revolution. It's a rail revolution. So China is introducing Asia-Europe rail connection revolution. Historically, this is very meaningful because, going back a little bit for previous slides, we are talking here about two versions of Silk Road: old Silk Road, new Silk Road. How are they different? China argues 21st century Silk Road is a revival of old Silk Road. Like more than 2,000 years ago, under Han Dynasty, right, such as this period, Asia-Europe, trade-wise, very intricately connected. That was old Silk Road. Not only trade, cultural exchanges, religious exchanges, and people-to-people exchanges were done at the time between Europe and Asia. But several hundred years of Asia-Europe, East-West exchanges of goods, culture, began to decline in the late 15th century because there was a discovery, technologically new discovery of sea transportation. Ships became much more advanced, and China began to look inward. In fact, under Ming Dynasty, China began to give up on sea adventure, maritime adventures. Then they tried to defend them from Mongolian threats from their neighbors rather than reaching out to open seas. So from that time period on, European countries began to emerge, replacing China, mostly through sea transportation and adventures. That was 15th century. And this brought the decline of old Silk Road. And sea transportation was much more effective, speedy, and this brought the supremacy of the West over the East. This Western rule of the last 5 centuries seems to have passed again. Maybe this is the meaning of the rise of New Silk Road. New Silk Road, Old Silk Road, I don't know, they say it is being revived. Might not be same, but still, the point is, going back to the discussion we were having, the role of, what's the role of rail? I want to go back to this debate. In the New Silk Road, why is it rail transportation revolution? We have to discuss this. Symbolically, China is going to first build train line linking China and Europe first. So the most symbolic image of China's BRI, in the pursuit of this global connectivity, is linking China-Europe by rails. So rail began to be built between China and Europe. I think important turning point was 2011. In 2014, already so many trains had already been linked. One of the headlines in 2014, first freight train arrived in Madrid from the Chinese trading city of EU. This hit the headline in some month in 2014, because symbolically this was seeming very important to many, because China-Madrid rail link, the longest at the time, got 13,000 kilometers. So Madrid was linked. As Madrid is linked to Western China, Xinjiang, all the way to EU, a lot of shaving of distance. So transportation time will be cut in half. Therefore, revolution. So for instance, from EU to Madrid, if you rely on shipping, it'll take 35 to 40 days, okay, reaching Valencia. But freight train, 21 days. So this much saving. And this was EU Madrid freight route. This was 7th railroad connecting. 2011, first route was Chongqing-Duisburg, Germany, 2011. Right, Chongqing is one of industrial centers in China, and the idea behind Chongqing-Duisburg at the time was to exploit low labor cost in Chongqing, in the inner city in China. The problem was the logistics. Already companies from the Western countries in automobiles, electronics, and some IT industries, they began to open factories in Chongqing, and they were agonizing over how to save transportation in goods they produced, shipping to European countries, because air freight, very fast but very expensive, shipping cheaper but taking so much time. So they were agonizing how to use rail efficiently. So that was the idea behind this kind of rail development. So these routes further expand to include Wuhan, Czech, Chengdu, Poland, Jeonju, Hamburg, Suzhou, Warsaw. But most of these routes go through Xinjiang and unavoidably Kazakhstan. So, according to Chinese railways, in the period of 2011 to 16, there have been exponential growth in the number of cargo train traveling between China and Europe. Beginning 17, 1,700, sharp increase, especially 2017, almost 3,000, 2018, 6,000. At the moment, 2020, 15,000, still growing. So what do they carry? They carry simple items like tomato sauce, which Urumqi, Xinjiang produces a lot. So they carry these, arrive in Italy in 25 days. And this is all thanks to reduction in transportation rates. Huge reduction over time, almost half. And this kind of rail revolution introduced new Cinderella cities. Of these cities, EU especially brought our attention, because EU is the first third-tier city to have all these kinds of rail link to Europe. EU is known as the Silicon Valley of China. Not a big city, like a little bit over a million population. It's a small city, probably the smallest city with a rail link to Europe. But they have some special quality. Why policymakers decided on EU as the next city in the New Silk Road? Because EU has the largest wholesale market. They produce very small items, like very cheap small items. There's so many people come to this international trade city, EU, to buy this kind of stuff. So they produce this, put it on the train, carry it all the way to European countries. Yearly selling volume by EU, billions and billions of dollars. So cargo train makes a lot of sense to cities like EU. So EU was born by railroad revolution. EU is not alone. There are many inland cities, Chengdu, Chongqing. These are all manufacturing, technology-related cities. Now, okay, next. Now, I said those cargo trains pass Kazakhstan because Kazakhstan is a key nation. They stands to benefit from the Asia-Europe trading. Therefore, Kazakhstan, they put billions of dollars into railway upgrade, and it is their national priority to be involved in this new Silk Road. Symbol of this Kazakhstan as a buckle on the PRI is Burgos Gateway project. Let me show you what is Burgos. This is South China Morning Post visual explainer. Let's see how Burgos looks like as a new Dubai. Burgos Gateway. This is Burgos. So train moving like this, passing Urumqi, the border city, Burgos. Burgos is a huge complex. They have a huge complex, not only train hub, but also the complex is designed to host so many factories because it's called industrial zone, but those developments have not been fully developed yet. So what they do here is they transfer from China railway gauge to Russian railway gauge because the size of railway road is different, so they have to transfer different measurement system. So that's what is done in Burgos. Then they move all the way. Okay, railway exchange station. But this is a huge complex, still under development. Still under development. Now, then let's see how trains travel all the way to London then. This is EU, city of EU. So train leaving EU, then like all the Silk Road, then pulling into Xi'an, Gansu, then Burgos, and change the major different gauge system. Then Almaty, the meeting with Russian system. The old Trans-Siberian Railroad. Then Moscow, Belarus, Warsaw, Berlin, France, London. So this London route opened 2017. And Spain, they go down like this, right? So now going back to Burgos. So I'm taking bird's eye view on entire railway map, crisscrossing, right? Now, I want to shift gears to discuss Iran. Iran, in particular, is going to stand to benefit from Asia, Europe, China, Europe rail connections. First, when Iran was connected to this train connectivity, 2016. So, happened to be Xi Jinping made a state visit to Iran as well as Saudi Arabia and some couple of Dubai, Middle Eastern countries at that time. So 2016 was a very important year for China in terms of their overtures, BRI overtures to Iran and other Middle Eastern countries. That's when China first proposed Chinese Arab paper. So that's when Iran rail connection was made. Still, why Iran was so important for China making a rail link? Because under many years of sanctions, despite the fact that Iran is at the really intersection of railway connections, Asia, Europe, Africa, Middle East, rail was underdeveloped so much in Iran under sanctions. Lifting sanctions under President Obama in 2015 opened huge window of opportunities for many countries waiting Iran to be open. So Western investors began to explore, and one of the things they look at was railroad development. So many countries planning on adding 2,000 kilometers of railroad in Iran in the next 5 years. No country has been more eager to help Iran than China. This is how China came in. So China signed an agreement to develop Iran's high-speed railway and to increase bilateral trade to $600 billion annually by 2020. This is the geography surrounding Iran. If you look at this map, why China was so anxious to have Iran with BRI program. So this is Chinese railway, China-Europe Railway Express. So Railway Express by China arriving Tehran, then this is not final destination. Chinese railway passing Iran, Turkey, then Europe. Okay. Not only China, but also Russia wants to leverage Iran, their north-south corridor, north-south railway corridor. Okay. So China, Russia competing over Iran. That's the game. Now, along with this comes energy. Now, railway open, I mentioned, although President came in, closed it again, closed the window again. Same goes for Iran's oil production. So Iran's oil production, the maximum carrying capacity of Iran oil production will be around 4 million barrels per day before the first round of sanction was imposed. So this was when first round of sanction imposed. So drastically cut oil production. President Obama opened, then oil production began to go up, right? Who is going to welcome this with open arms? China. China, more than any other country. China became #1 oil consumer in 2017, replacing America. So China needs Iran for railway, but oil and gas. I don't know, probably that's the reason Trump imposed sanction again. Then the goal was to reduce Iran's oil production. So this is going to illustrate a lot of maneuvering between Russia and China in the context of US-China great game. Why Iran is just sandwiched between China and America. This is what you have to further study after this lecture. This is the end of my lecture. Thank you very much.